On this video, we're going to be looking at the extent to which the European short-haul air market is contestable. So we're going to be doing a mini case study. Now, contestability comes up very frequently on exam papers. It's one that examiners do like. They also like looking at the air industry because there's things like collusion that we've looked at in other videos, or price discrimination, but also you're looking at a high level of competition and potential contestability. So when Ryanair and EasyJet were the new boys, the questions focused on the extent to which the existing players like British Airways could keep them out. Since they've become more established, there's other questions on whether they can maintain their position, and a lot of that actually focuses on contestability. So in order to see whether they are contestable or not, we need to look at the conditions that a contestable market adheres to. So we're going to be looking at whether the entry to or exit from the market is relatively costless, particularly whether there are heavy sunk costs in this industry, and whether existing big players, particularly people like British Airways, have cost advantages over the short-haul market. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, you can see who the main players are in the European short-haul market. So at the top there, we've got Ryanair. EasyJet, it's in second place, but is growing much faster than Ryanair. And Norwegian Airlines are the third biggest, and again, rapid growth. So is there a suggestion there that perhaps Ryanair's expansion is starting to come to a head now? Ryanair have been in a little bit of trouble of late. Now, this video is basically looking at the air market as it existed before the COVID shutdown. It could be very different in a few years' time. So first of all, we need to look at possible entry, exit or sunk costs. And as you know, one of the biggest sunk costs is branding. So one of the questions is, to what extent do people fly the brand or fly the price? So for example, if you were looking up an air flight from London to, say, Rome, what would your instinct be to go to? Would it be to go via Google, in which case you're looking for the cheapest price, or would you get onto the Ryanair site or the EasyJet site, in which case you would be flying the brand? One of the things you'll note in this market is they don't make great use of loyalty cards. Air miles isn't particularly used in this market. So if you think that people fly the brand, that makes the market less contestable. If you think, bear in mind this is a cheap market, that they fly the price, then that makes it more contestable. So the next thing that we need to look at in this sector is the market expanding or contracting? In a contracting market, existing players have to get customers from the other players, which means that they'll have to spend more on marketing and branding to win those customers over. In an expanding market, however, customers will have relatively limited brand loyalty, if at all. So if we look at an income elastic luxury product like flying, if you look at, first of all, at the EU27 data, first of all, we can look at the impact of the recession that occurred in 2008. You can see that the number of customers in 2008 was 706 million. And due to the recession, due to people not having money, it fell to 688 million by 2010. However, between 2010 and 2019, you saw an expansion of that market. So in 2010, we had 688 million, but by 2019, we had more than 1 billion customers. So in that time, it had expanded by 70-odd%. So we are looking at an expanding market, and that makes it more contestable. So the third thing in this section that we can look at is the cost of the aircraft. Now, instinctively, you're going to think quite rightly that aircraft cost a lot of money to buy, which is true. However, airlines that want to move into the market don't have to buy it. They can lease, which would make it a lot cheaper. And let's say that they move into the market and it all goes wrong. Well, all they've got to do is not renew the lease. Now, of course, there will be some costs that they're going to have on board, but nothing like as many as if they'd expended many, many millions of pounds buying up a new air fleet. So the fact that you can lease makes it slightly more contestable. That's one of the ways that both Ryanair and EasyJet moved into the market in the first place, by initially leasing rather than buying. Now, the next thing that we need to look at is the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is a sunk cost, building that infrastructure. You think about the water pipes that are outside your street, completely sunk in a literal sense. Now, in terms of airlines, they will need a website, and that will be something that will be specifically produced for them, so they'll need that. However, that website basically enables customers to do most of the work for them. It's customers that book the seat. You don't need travel agents or anything like that. So though the web infrastructure is a sunk cost, it's not that significant a cost compared to the other cost of running an airline. Now, the other thing you need to do is, of course, you need to have space for your aircraft to land, and you need to buy that from the airport. And you can see there's a lovely little picture of a whole load of Ryanair aircraft at Stansted, which is their central operating base, it's their headquarters in Europe. And so they will have to buy up those particular landing rights. And of course, once they've got the landing rights, that prevents others from getting those landing rights. So that is a bit of infrastructure that they can't avoid, but there's going to be a however there. So in summary, in your paragraphs on entry, exit or sunk cost, you need to consider the extent that branding is important in this industry, the nature of the market is expanding or contracting, whether you have to pay the full fixed costs or whether you can avoid some of those fixed costs, and any infrastructure costs in that particular industry. So now we need to look at the possible cost advantages for incumbents. Now, I was talking about landing slots, and if you look on the left hand side, you will see that if aircraft have to land at Heathrow, buying up those slots is incredibly expensive. You can see on the 2013 data, Etihad had to spend £46 million with a slot value of £15.4 million. So to land an aircraft in a particular slot, to buy up that slot, cost them £15 million per slot. But of course, whereas British Airways do have to operate from Heathrow because they are a multi-global flyer, companies like Ryanair and EasyJet don't. So if you look on the right hand side, you can see that Ryanair operate from Stansted, where the landing slots will be a lot cheaper. Stansted is more than 40 miles away from London, and these low-cost airlines tend to use those sorts of airports. EasyJet operate from Gatwick, so that means that BA do not have cost advantages. Actually, the little firms can duck and dive and get in there relatively cheap by operating away from the hub airports. So what about potential economies of scale for the incumbents? Well, again, on the left-hand side, you can see the air fleet for British Airways, and you can see the number of different types of aircraft that they fly. Airbuses of 6-7 different types, Boeing 777s and Boeing 787s. So that means that they have to train their staff up on all of those aircraft, and they need to hold spares for all of those different types of aircraft. If we compare that with Ryanair, now Ryanair have got a much larger air fleet than BA. They've got about 150 more aircraft. However, if you look at that list, you can see that all of them bar 28 are Boeing 737s, which means that they only have to train their pilots, their air crew on 737s. They only have to maintain parts for 737s, and of course their ground crew can become incredibly specialist at refueling that particular type of plane. To a certain extent, it's like the way that Aldi and Lidl can compete against Tesco. They're much smaller than Tesco, but they stock a much lower range of brands, so they can buy those in bulk, whereas Tesco have to buy in a whole range of stock from a whole range of suppliers. So on that second area of cost advantages, the existing players don't have that many. The newcomers will be competing on roughly the same cost terms as the existing players. So again, that makes it a relatively contestable industry. Finally, we can gather some empirical evidence from the industry. Now, if you can see firms joining the industry, that tells you that there can't be that many barriers to entry. And if firms are happy to leave the industry, well, not that happy, they would probably have made a loss, then that tells you that there can't be that many barriers to exit. So if we look at some examples of short-haul airlines that have set up since 2015, there's a whole load of them. Just get into Wikipedia, you will see lots of examples of airlines that have been there for only a few years. And similarly there, you will see airlines that have left the industry over the last few years. So at the same time as firms joining, other firms have been leaving. You can see some of the big ones that have been in the news in the UK, the collapse of Thomas Cook in 2019, and down at the bottom there, the collapse of Monarch in 2017. And if you look here, you can see evidence of firms that have moved into the market and left the market in a relatively short time span. So WOW Air joined in 2012, left in 2019. Borajet 2010 to 2017, etc., etc. So there's a lot of evidence there that firms are happy to join and happy to leave. There can't be that many barriers to entry and exit, because if there were, we wouldn't have anything like this number. So there is considerable evidence of industry churn, which again would make the market relatively contestable. Let's sum up the question. In terms of entry, exit, sunk costs, powers of the brand, not that great. People fly the price, not the brand. We're looking at an expanding market. We're looking at a market where the setup costs, the aircraft, can be mitigated, and where the infrastructure costs aren't as important as the other cost of actually flying the planes. There are relatively few cost advantages for the incumbents, and the empirical evidence suggests that there's a lot of industry churn. So your conclusion has got to be that this is a relatively contestable market, but don't forget you must still include some evidence of pointing the other way. So you do need to talk a little bit about brands and a bit about setting up the web infrastructure. But broadly speaking, we are looking at a contestable market, fairly high on the contestability ranks.